Kurt Waldheim made one thing clear to the Austrian public tonight: he has no intention of resigning. But later, in his interview with ABC News, he revealed another side to that decision.
It's a terrible life for me, I tell you this. It's not easy. But I think it is my responsibility for this country to go through with it.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel in London, and this is Nightline. Waldheim takes sharp issue with many of the findings of an international commission which he himself created to look into his war record.
I think the principal charge that's being leveled against you is that you've been less than honest, that you have concealed, that you have misled, that you have diverted, that in some cases you have flat out lied.
Well, this is your opinion, not mine.
No, and he remains, above all, defiantly determined to hang on.
The same people who apparently wish to explain that I can't work, that I'm living in a bunker. I don't know whether it is a bunker.
No, tonight, an exclusive interview with the President of Austria, Kurt Waldheim.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from London, Ted Koppel.
ABC's chief foreign correspondent, Pierre Salinger, and I met with President Waldheim in what he quite accurately described as looking anything like a bunker. Once, in fact, it had served as bedroom to the Habsburg Empress Maria Theresa. Dr. Waldheim had just finished videotaping his speech to the Austrian people, a speech in which he warned his Austrian critics that they were pouring oil on the international fire of protest against him. He spoke of his repeated willingness to be reconciled with his critics, but then accused them of trying to undermine the Austrian electoral process and of employing manipulation, lies, and forgery against him. In fact, as Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield reports, the charges against Waldheim have been building, and the level of domestic protest against him, while still in a distinct minority, is becoming louder with each passing day.
The Vienna Opera Ball, the essence of Middle European elegance. A celebration fit for a king, or in this case, the President of Austria, Kurt Waldheim, surrounded by the ceremony he has always loved. Kurt Waldheim's life has been filled with pomp and pageantry, most notably during the 10 years he served as UN Secretary General. But at every step up the ladder toward his lofty posts, Waldheim was protected by a bodyguard of falsehoods. Nearly 2 years ago, Waldheim's official biography began to unravel when this photograph appeared showing him in a Nazi officer's uniform during World War II. In his own writings, Waldheim had always said he was wounded at the front early in the war, then studied law in Austria. At first, he laughed off the contradiction.
Why should I give my whole military service in that book? There was nothing to hide.
Then, more contradictions. A 1940 court application listed Waldheim's membership in Nazi youth groups. He said they were athletic and social gatherings. Last week, the Austrian commission he appointed said flatly Waldheim had belonged to Nazi student federations. The more serious charges focused on Lieutenant Waldheim's service in the Balkans, where anti-Nazi resistance was fierce and where atrocities against partisans and against Jews were severe. Waldheim at first said he knew nothing of this. He was simply a cog in the war machine.
As a simple ordnance officer, I had no authority to give any orders. I was just an ordnance officer who put the reports together and sent it up to the high command. That was all.
But more documents kept surfacing. The award to Waldheim of a medal by the puppet fascist Croatian state. His role as deputy intelligence officer in the infamous Army Group E that deported Jews from Greece to Auschwitz. His unit's role in the massacres of partisans and civilians in Kozara, one of the worst of the Balkan atrocities. His work in personally recording Hitler's orders to execute resistance members, and his role as personal keeper of the most secret Nazi wartime records. For one former Waldheim UN aide, the documentation was incontrovertible.
Whether or not he was actually guilty of being deeply involved in actual atrocities What is absolutely clear is he knew all about it and was deeply involved.
Another revelation surfaced worthy of a spy novel. Buried in the UN war crimes files were records dating back 40 years. They showed that a Yugoslavian war crimes unit had urged that Kurt Waldheim be prosecuted for murder. Based on those documents, the United States last spring placed Waldheim on a watch list, in effect banning this head of state from American soil. For two Austrians who helped compile a defense of Waldheim, these charges are baseless.
It is also important to note that Dr. Waldheim during this whole period never had any command authority.
Neither his commanding officers or anybody in the German army in Greece had the slightest thing to do with these deportations. This was not their business. It was a business of the SS and of the Nazi police.
His defenders add that Waldheim has become caught up in the larger debate over whether Austria was conquered by Hitler in the 1938 Anschluss or whether Austria welcomed Hitler as a hero.
Now he has become a symbol. It's like an old Christmas tree from last year, and there are still little swastikas hanging all over the place, and that's poor President Waldheim, because they are hanging on him.
Only one survivor of the horrors has recently come forward to accuse Waldheim of direct involvement in murders. Yugoslavian partisan Miodrag Čedić said it was common knowledge that Waldheim gave the orders.
All killing, all execution is by the order of Kurt Waldheim.
Neither Čedić nor anyone else produced any evidence to support this claim, but another, unanswered, intriguing question concerns Waldheim's climb to power at the UN. Were there nations who knew of his past and who sought to use that knowledge for political advantage?
This is the perfect individual whom you would want to compromise if you were running an intelligence agency.
I find it ironic that the closest area of relationship between the Soviets and the United States politically may well have been the exchange of information in the war against Nazis.
This week, the pressure on Kurt Waldheim intensified. The commission of historians he appointed said it could not prove he had personally committed atrocities, but concluded also that he must have known about them, and that his cooperation made it easier for those war crimes to happen. That triggered a genuine governmental crisis, mass demonstrations in the streets demanding Waldheim's resignation, and a threat by Austrian Chancellor Wernicke to quit if the controversy was not settled. Tonight, in a nationally televised address, Waldheim refused to resign.
A head of state must not retreat in the face of slanders, hateful demonstrations, and wholesale condemnations.
With every new revelation, Kurt Waldheim has retreated and parried. I was not there became I was there but did not know, and that became I knew but I did not act. Now Austria must decide, as the 50th anniversary of the Anschluss approaches, whether that defense is good enough for the leader of a nation that has long called itself Hitler's first victim. Jeff Greenfield for Nightline at the United Nations.
When we come back, our interview earlier this evening in Vienna with Kurt Waldheim.
This is ABC News Nightline.
In the speech he delivered to his countrymen tonight, President Waldheim admitted nothing. Indeed, he reassured his viewers that while an international commission of historians had raised numerous questions about his truthfulness, such charges are totally unfounded, and Waldheim intends to serve out his full term as president. It was in that context that we raised with Dr. Waldheim his exclusion from the United States by the U.S. Justice Department, which has placed him on a so-called watch list, his status as someone approaching the role of international outcast, and the growing pressure within Austria for his resignation.
Dr. Waldheim, I've been told that sometime during the next week, you're going to be approached by some leading industrialists in this country, by some leading politicians in this country, urging you again to step down.
That is not true. Nobody has ever urged me to do that.
I'm not saying it's happened. I'm saying it's going to happen in the next week or so.
I haven't been informed, and I don't expect it.
And if it does happen, your reaction would be what? Essentially what you've said to us here this evening?
That was the reason. This is one of the reasons, but there are many others. The people has a right to hear from me what I'm thinking about it. They have elected me with almost 54%. This is a very convincing majority. They have a right to know how I think about it, and I gave them a clear answer.
May I ask you a question about Your many friends and colleagues that you've made over the years, you pointed out, you've been in public life for a great many years as ambassador, as foreign minister, as secretary general of the United Nations, now as president. And you've made a great many contacts with some of the leading figures in the world. Not one of them has come out publicly in your support. Why do you think that is?
Well, if somebody goes around with a file in which you are accused to be a war criminal, a file which is a fabrication, as it turns out, everybody knows it now. Well, I can imagine that people are thinking twice and will first verify. So for me, this is very simple. But this is again the proof for this slanderous campaigns against me.
But I must question whether, in fact, your function is being carried on as the function of an Austrian president would normally be carried on. You have met, if I recall, with King Hussein. You have met with Pope John Paul, who after all...
a moral authority in the world.
He's a moral authority, but I think it also must be pointed out he also met with the man who tried to assassinate him, so he is also the representative of Christian charity. I mean,
he was not a political figure. The man who tried
of course
to
not.
assassinate
No, I'm just
him.
saying...
So there is a difference between an assassin and a statesman. I think we have to make a difference.
No, I'm simply making the observation, Mr. President, with all due respect, that the Pope, as one of the leaders of Christian charity in the world, meets with a great many different people.
Yes, but
for a variety
this has
of
nothing
reasons.
to do with Christian charity. This is excuse me, but this is no comparison.
It has to
This
do
was a normal state visit, which wasn't liked by certain quarters, I know it, but it was quite a normal official visit, with all the honors which a head of state receives on such occasions. So don't create the impression this was something not so important. It was a very important visit.
It was clearly an important visit, doubly important, however, because it was so rare. You have met so rare. You have met with the Pope. Forgive me if I may. You've met with the Pope. You've met with King Hussein. I believe you also met with the leader of Pakistan.
Yes.
That's it.
No, that is quite enough. In Switzerland, for instance, the president doesn't travel at all.
You don't feel like an outcast. You don't feel
No,
isolated.
this is what the Anglo-Saxon press is saying all the time, but it's not my opinion. They have a right to say whatever they like, but I don't like it. I find it untrue. I find it a calumny. I find it fabricated, but I have to live with it.
You're also on the watch list of the United States.
Yeah.
I'm sure that troubles you.
This is a serious violation of international law.
Why is that?
I was professor of international affairs at Georgetown University. I'm a jurist. Under international law, no state has a right to put a foreign head of state on under its own jurisdiction. So the United States has no rights whatsoever, no right whatsoever.
So why don't you challenge it?
To exercise jurisdiction over a head of state of another country. There are people in your country, officials even officials in the Attorney General's office saying, well, why does he not appeal? Knowing very well that there is no possibility to appeal. As I said, I can only apply for a visa as a private citizen. But there is no juridical process of appealing. What is that?
But I have been told that the appeal system of our courts in the United States are open to you.
Now, so you can see how wrong those informations are and why I'm so uneasy about informations which are given and which are not correct. We have our Ministry for Foreign Affairs has repeatedly inquired what are the possibilities to appeal to such a decision. And we always got the information he should just apply for a visa.
Let me change the question a little bit. I mean, one of the things is that the reason for invoking this against you is based on documents which have never been published.
Exactly.
Wouldn't you like to have those documents published?
Of course, we have requested it. We were informed, and I have to be very clear here. The government of Austria had requested those documents so that we could see what is the basis for that incredible decision. What is the basis? We were refused.
May I ask you this question? If indeed it turns out that you can appeal through the U.S. court system, if by some chance you're wrong and the information given to me is right, may I assume that you will then appeal?
Well, if there is any legal process, I would of course have done it immediately, obviously.
But if you
because
find
I consider this a very wrong, unfair decision.
I think Mr. Koppel actually is right, because although my information is slightly different, my information is that there is a possibility of making an appeal, and once the appeal is filed, the document must become public.
Yes, but...
So that by doing that, you would succeed in having something happen that you say you wanted to have happen.
Yes, but I can't appeal. I told you that already. I can't appeal. This is the information we got from the State Department on repeated requests to let us know how I can appeal to this decision. And the answer was always to ask for a visa. And then, on an administrative basis, it will be decided whether or not to grant a visa to me. Now, this is, of course, unacceptable to a head of state.
You have referred repeatedly, Dr. Waldheim, when we talk about the incidents during and just prior to the Second World War, to your youth. You were a very young man at the time. Since, as I said, one of the charges that is leveled against you is a lack of moral leadership, may I refer to an incident that reportedly happened somewhat later in your life when you were the foreign minister. That was during the time of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, when you authorized a telex to be sent to the Austrian ambassador, who at that time was giving safe haven to some Czechs who felt that they were in danger. You ordered that they be kicked out of the embassy. You ordered that no visas be issued any further. And the ambassador, to his enormous credit, ignored your orders. Is that evidence of the kind of moral authority that you were talking about?
Mr. Koppel, this is a complete lie. Nothing is true of this. Nothing.
No such telegram?
Absolutely nothing. But I know that lies exist. It follows me all the time. I made it clear repeatedly on television and on a number of other occasions. What happened, let me say this before you open your file, what happened is that there was an emergency committee which existed during the Czech uprising, or whatever we call it. And the Minister of Interior found out that passports were stolen from the embassy, and visa forms, security measures, which the Minister of Interior, Dr. Soronic, he wrote all this to me in a letter explaining the situation. And he gave this order, this instruction to the embassy. He said, look, we have to find out what happened with those stolen passports. And as soon as we have found out, you continue. And that was done.
And that's all the telegram said?
That's all. Well, the telegram, I think the telegram speaks of that closing the embassy and not, or legation, it was not an embassy, legation and not issuing visa.
Is this the one we're talking about?
Yeah, well, there's nothing which I do not know. It confirms what I just told you. Only it doesn't say what the reason is.
With all due respect, it doesn't confirm anything you
the reason for all this was, of course, not any inhuman decision by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, certainly not, but it was the security reasons, and I'm sure if any other embassy would be, or government would be in a similar situation, that passports and visa forms were stolen, that they would first make sure that those passports and visa are not misused for purposes which the country doesn't know. Incidentally, that instruction was changed a few days later, as I told you.
Yeah, but
you see, the Minister of Interior, it says in the last paragraph, on the request of the Minister of Interior.
But the telegram was sent by the Foreign Ministry.
Of course, because no minister has a right to communicate in our service, to communicate directly with an embassy abroad. Everything has to go through the Foreign Ministry.
So
and most of these things didn't even see.
So the ambassador who ignored this order, was he disciplined?
He was not. I didn't take any measure against him.
Well, of course not.
I didn't take any measure.
But wouldn't you think that if this was being done for security reasons, that an ambassador who ignored a direct order from his foreign minister, that he would be disciplined?
We did not. We accepted his point of view. There were telephone calls between him and my Secretary General.
You initialed the order that sent it out. Would you like to see it?
I have seen that. I know that. Yeah, but this is not the same cable. There's a different cable. Don't show me this cable. There's a different cable which I have seen, which is not the same. But it's not that long cable you have shown me.
The only thing I'm questioning, and I'm still somewhat curious, is you feel quite correctly that if there is a matter of the nation's security at risk, then closing down an embassy would be a normal thing to do. I'm still confused as to why the man who was then the minister, the acting ambassador, why he disagreed and why he, in effect, acted on his own.
He did contact the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The man with whom he spoke, our former Secretary General, is dead, so we can't ask him anymore. But believe me that was done in contact with the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
When we come back, what did Kurt Waldheim know about various war crimes, and when did he know it? President Waldheim is quite right in one respect. The most damaging charge against him, that he was an active war criminal, has never been proved. Indeed, the International Commission, which released its report last week, stated quite plainly that it had found no evidence to substantiate such a charge. But that same commission makes equally clear its belief that Dr. Waldheim must have known about some of the major atrocities committed by military units with which he was associated at a time and place where Waldheim was present. The commission analyzed Waldheim's numerous denials and found them not credible.
Somebody told me, why don't you say it? Nobody would criticize you if you were to say, I knew but I couldn't do anything against it. But I told him, why should I not say the truth? I hadn't known about it because I wasn't there.
It says, if I may just read from the report here, and perhaps you can help me if my German is bad or if my translation is insufficient. Waldheims Behauptung, habe nichts von dem Abtransport der Juden vom griechischen Festland und von den griechischen Inseln gewusst, stützen sich auf Waldheim's insistence that he didn't know anything about the transport of Jews from the Greek mainland and from the Greek islands, rests on the following points. A. Habe davon erst nach dem Kriege erfahren. She first found out about it after the war. Is that true?
From Salonika.
Yes.
And Greece, yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
You still maintain that?
Yes.
At the time of these happenings, he wasn't in Greece. You still maintain that?
Well, we must separate clearly Salonika. This was what I was asked for all the time, to explain that, and I have given a clear-cut answer to this question. I wasn't there, therefore I couldn't have known. And as far as the islands are concerned, there's not one document which proves in any way that these matters went through my department.
May I go on to the third point? The Wehrmacht, the German army, wasn't involved in any of these acts, and therefore you, as a member of the Wehrmacht, wouldn't have had anything to do with them. Is that
Correct.
still your?
That's
is that still your claim? You still
Certainly,
maintain that?
of course.
May I just now read the conclusion? This is what the Commission concludes now on the basis of all of these answers. Alle diese Punkte wurden in obigen Ausführungen widerlegt. All of these points.
Where's the evidence?
May I just finish translating, because I'm not sure that
Correct.
all of these points, each of these points that you have just reconfirmed, the Commission maintains have been contradicted by the evidence in the report.
There is no evidence.
They think
the members, as they made a mistake in regard to my political past, there is the same inconsistency with the conclusions of the report and the facts which are contained in the report, in the main part of the report. And the Commission member who stated this hasn't presented any evidence.
Yeah, but I mean, with all due respect, Dr. Waldheim, we are referring here to what all the commissioners have signed as their finding, And they find that in each instance, every one of the claims that you made is not substantiated by the documentation.
Well, I can only reject this because it is quite clear that the facts contained in the report do not correspond with the conclusions. And I will maintain this, my opinion, because I'm convinced that this is the case.
What are we going to have to do, Dr. Waldheim? I mean, is there going to have to be another commission and another report? And
Well, it was said by the Chancellor when there are new elements, one could always look into them. One could ask the chairman to look into that matter again. But frankly, I think we were very generous in giving international scientists or experts better a chance to look into the matter. And I can only repeat that the basic announcement which was made by the chairman of the commission, the Swiss professor Kurt, was very clear in the final press conference, and this is on record, of course. He said that there is no guilt of Dr. Waldheim.
you keep
That's the finding.
You keep clinging, Dr. Waldheim, to that one conclusion of this commission, which supports apparently.
But this was the mandate.
I
You see,
understand.
the commission has to stick to the mandate.
No,
the mandate was written by the foreign minister of Austria and Vice Chancellor Dr. Mock to the chairman of the commission. Please find out whether there is any personal guilt of Dr. Waldheim during his war years.
Yes, but you see,
And this
Dr. Waldheim-
question has to be answered. It was answered in the way that there is no guilt, and that was done repeatedly. This answer was given repeatedly. And that's all the commission was asked for, to enter into philosophical aspects or into the question, what did he know, what did he not know, how much guilt is involved because he was in a function where he knew a little more or a little less than others. This is not the question.
Or not to go into the issues of whether you have been telling the truth or whether you have been lying over the last few years? You don't think that is the
Those who attack me were lying. If one pretends that I was lying because I didn't give all the details of my military career right from the beginning, this is not something I can accept. And here in Austria, people who elected me, they knew exactly what I did and what I was during the war. They elected me because this was the normal fate of a young Austrian of, let's say, 20, 22 years of age. To make him responsible for the wrongdoings of Hitler and of the Nazi army, which I condemned, of course, this is not fair.
And I don't think, with all due respect, Dr. Waldheim, that is the charge, the principal charge
Now, what
that
is
is
the
being
principal
leveled
charge?
against you.
What?
I think the principal charge that's being leveled against you is that you've been less than honest in the way you have dealt with these matters, most particularly over the last 2 years, but also over the last 40 years, that you have concealed, that you have misled, that you have diverted, that in some cases you have flat out lied. And what this report appears to do is to confirm that.
Well, this is your opinion, not mine.
No, it's the conclusion of the commission.
I reject this opinion categorically. I have not hidden anything of my military career. I think this whole accusation is unfounded. And in fact, I was not expecting from you to give a detailed curriculum vitae of your military service, especially if you didn't have anything to hide.
No, I understand. The only point that is made time and again, and I'm not sure I've really heard a direct response to it, is that, first of all, in your autobiography, in a letter that you wrote in 1980 to Congressman Solars of Brooklyn, you seem to gloss over, to distract, to mislead anyone who might have been looking into that rather critical period of your war service by leaving the deliberate impression that during that time you were a law student, that your military service was over, when in fact it was not.
Now let's discuss your statement point by point. The letter of Congressman Solers, I tried to get it from him because it's still in the file somewhere. I don't have it. He only published my answer. But the letter, I remember very well, asked me, one, whether it's true that I was a Nazi, and two, whether I was involved in atrocities on the Eastern Front. In both cases, I answered with no, and this is correct. It is long proven that I was not a Nazi, on the contrary, that I was an anti-Nazi, and it is also proven that I was not involved in any atrocities on the Eastern Front. I told you I was in a reconnaissance unit. We had nothing to do with
If I may,
partisans.
and forgive me, I just don't want these points to get lost. When you say it's not been proven that you were a Nazi, certainly you were not a member of the party. The Commission, again, maintains that you were, despite your denials,
And what
a
would
member
you-
of the Sturmabteilung.
And how would you interpret then the rectification of the member of the Commission who was asked to check this and said that it was changed?
Dr. Waldheim, you like to refer to one member of the Commission
Yeah.
who agrees with what you believe. You like to select other members of the Commission who disagree with what you believe. I'm left with the Commission report, the one
Yes.
they all signed. And in the report that they all signed, they all claim that the evidence is that you were a member of the SA.
No, this was changed and corrected by Mr. van Weltenhausen. I can show you the public announcement.
But you do acknowledge
He
it's in the report.
He was very disappointed. Well, when he found out, perhaps he was away, as I mentioned, for a few days to verify that falsified document in Banja Luka. When he came back, apparently he expected that the text would have remained the same. He signed it, and when he found out that it was not so, he made a public statement, which we have, where he dissociates himself from that statement. So what can I expect then from other similar incidents?
When we come back, President Waldheim appeals for understanding on a human level. Our interview with President Waldheim lasted for an hour and 20 minutes. As it drew to a close, I asked him if there was anything he wanted to add. No question, really, just an opportunity to address an American television audience directly.
Sometimes I have the feeling that people do not really understand the situation, which from the human point of view is very, very difficult for me. If I look to my wife, to my children, to my grandchildren, and if one of the grandchildren asks his father whether the grandfather is a war criminal, well, this is very tough, very hard for a grandfather. I'm sometimes unhappy that this human touch cannot be seen. There is a permanent flow of accusations. I have sometimes the impression that some quarters here and overseas want to make me guilty, and they are desperate that they can't find anything. I remember one member of the commission went to Yugoslavia and came back. The press asked him, "What did you find?" And he said, "Well, we didn't find a gold mine." What kind of language? We didn't find a gold mine. Was he unhappy that he didn't find a document which would accuse me of having committed war crimes? It's this kind of psychological aspect which bothers me, which worries me, because I'm a human being like anybody else, like you are. We all have families. I have 3 children, grown-up children, and 3 grandchildren. It's a terrible life for me, I tell you this. It's not easy. But I think it is my responsibility for this country to go through with it, to go through with this tremendous, incredible campaign which never existed in recent history. The whole world is mobilized by the media. I tell you this. Unfortunately, it's the truth. I wish it wouldn't be. My wife once said the other day in the morning, when will the day come when the name of Waldheim is not in the headlines? And she's right. Artificial build-ups are created. I was offered golden coins in Yugoslavia to save hostages. nonsense of this kind. Of course, it's all not true. But of course, it bothers me tremendously that after having had such a important career, where I could do so much, work so much for peace, international understanding, international cooperation, when I risked my skin, when I traveled to Tehran to save the American hostages. Well, I wonder sometimes, did I deserve this? Just because I didn't mention my whole military curriculum vitae right from the beginning, I had no idea that that would one day create a problem. I was appalled when, at the beginning of the election campaign in Austria, that whole thing started. And maybe I was too, how should I say, maybe I made a mistake not to believe in such a campaign against me, because I always had a clear conscience, and I said, what can they find? I haven't done anything. I was an ordnance officer, I was an interpreter, I wasn't a Nazi, on the contrary, so why should I get worried? And then came this avalanche of accusations, etc. So this is my personal feeling. Again, if I have misled my friends in the United States because I didn't say everything as far as my military career is concerned, I'm sorry. I didn't want it. It was not done purposely, believe me. And I hope this will be understood, because I have so many friends in the United States, and I hope they will believe me that I haven't done anything wrong.
That's our report for tonight. Nightline will not be seen tomorrow, so that my colleagues Peter Jennings and David Brinkley, who are in New Hampshire, can bring you the very latest primary results. I'm Ted Koppel in London. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.